This lesson is creating HTML dynamically with template literals. The objectives for this lesson are to discover how to dynamically incorporate HTML with template literals, understand the advantages of template literals over string concatenation, explore various examples showcasing the use of template literals, keep HTML and tokens within a single element. Template literals are much better than string concatenation because long lines can be split onto multiple lines. That means less horizontal scrolling. You can use both single and double quotes without escaping them, and we get IntelliSense on variables. Now there's still no color coding within the template literals, so it still can be a little bit harder to read and debug. Let's take a look at our first sample of building a single label and add to the DOM using JavaScript and template literals. In this HTML page, if we take a look down here on line 26, you see a div with an ID of output. So what I want to do is I want to build a label that I'm going to insert into that div area. So if we look down at this function called display data, when I click on the button you see on line 24, it's going to call this function. And what I'm going to do is create a label with template literals. Template literals are the backtick, and then you have whatever you want in there. And then if you want to use a variable, you use the $, open curly brace, and then you put in an expression. In this place, I'm going to use getValue name. GetValue comes from the common JS. And the common JS has this little get value here on lines 1 through 3 that simply grabs the value from the document.getElementById. So we're going to build that together. Now what's really nice is I'm not having to do string concatenation, right? I'm not using a plus sign. The template literal here actually says, well, get that value and put it right there wherever that is in the string. So you can see the label class equals movie info, and then we would have the name put there, and then we close the labels. A little bit easier to read. If we have both single and double quotes, it doesn't matter because we're in backticks. So if we run this, now when we say display data, it's taken that label and it's inserted that directly into the DOM where that div ID equals output is located. Let's take a look at another example where we maybe check our value and see if there's no input, and then we display one of two labels using template literals. So here in this HTML page, you can see I've got on line 20 the name that I'm going to be inputting. I don't have a value in there right now. We're still going to click on a button that's going to call that display data function that we wrote earlier. I still have on line 26 that div ID equals output. So now inside of the display data function, I'm going to go ahead and retrieve the name. I'm going to check to see if that name has some value, and if it does, I'll build a label using template literals, and I insert that name variable. If the name was not input, I'm going to go ahead and output a label that just simply says no movie input. Whatever HTML I build, I'll then put into the inner HTML of that div. Let's go ahead and run this. You can see when I don't have anything, it says no movie input. If I type in something like Captain America and we do display data, now it says, yep, there was a name that was input. Let's go ahead and display the label with that input. Our next example, we're going to build multiple labels now, and we're going to add it to the DOM using these template literals and JavaScript. So here in this HTML page, line 20 input where the value is Young Frankenstein. I've got then a drop down where you select a movie rating. I then have an input for the genre, an input for the year, an input for the price, and then again my same button to say display the data and the div ID equals output. So what I'm doing now down here is I'm going to grab each one of those values from those input fields using the get value. The price, I'm going to go ahead and call a little function I wrote called format currency, which is also in this common JS. See that right here in lines 9 through 14. And then I'm going to build my HTML. So look at this. I'm actually splitting this across multiple lines. Now this is really nice. That's one of the great things about having a template literal is I can split the lines across multiple lines. So it makes it easier for me to read. I'm still not getting the color coding that I would normally get if it was just pure HTML, but at least I get to use the little $sign and the curly braces to put each variable into the appropriate label. Once that HTML is built, I go ahead and insert it into the inner HTML of that div. Let's run this, click on Display Data, and now you can see the labels that were added to the DOM. This next example is the same sample that we just saw, but we're going to now just build everything using an object literal and a method in that object literal. Let's take a look. In this HTML page, it's exactly the same one that we had before. I've got the input for the movie name, I've got the select dropdown, I've got the genre, I've got the year, I've got the price. And then I've got the button to display the data. The only difference is in the display data, I'm creating an object literal and I'm assigning to each property the value coming from the input fields. Then I created a build HTML method that returns, and again, I use that same template literal here to create the HTML that's going to get returned. So now on line 84, I simply say movie.buildHTML. It returns it and puts that into the inner HTML. Nothing too drastic changed here, just kind of a different way to approach the same problem. Now, if we look at the template literal, it's really not that much different than string concatenation. So let's change this up a little bit. We're going to use now the template element in HTML. This is where you're going to store HTML with some tags or tokens into the HTML template element. We're going to assign an ID to this template element so we can use JavaScript to get the values inside of the template, and we'll set the type attribute to text/HTML. So what we do is we're going to read that template into a variable. We're going to perform a search and replace on the tags, those tokens, with real data. The token or the tag is always going to be in the form two open curly braces, followed by some variable name, and then closing two curly braces. And then we'll read the name from some object literal or some other data that has a real value. We'll run that through some sort of templating engine. For now, we're just going to write JavaScript to do it, but later we'll do a templating engine, and that will then take that value, put it into wherever that token was, and then that is then displayed on our HTML page. In the past, this was done with a script element. So people would actually do script ID equals something, and the type is text/HTML. Same idea. In that one, you had to set the type attribute, but the problem is you weren't really clear on what that script tag was doing. It's not being used as script. So the template tag really is more semantic, but it gives us a very clear meaning on what we're doing. So let's take a look at how to place HTML to generate in a template element. So once again, we have an HTML page with those inputs. So we have the movie input name, we have the select with all the movie ratings, we have the genre, we have the year, the price, we have our button to call the display data function, and then we have our div with the ID of output. But here's where it gets a little different. On line 54, we use the template HTML element. I give it an ID of template, type equals text/HTML. Inside of there, and look what I've done, I've got labels now. Label, class equals movie info. And look at that, I'm getting the nice color coding. There's my little token or tag for name. And then you see down on the next line, I have rating. On the next one, I have genre. And then year and price. So that template is what we're going to now read in and replace each of those tokens with the values we read from those input fields. So down here in our display data function, we're going to build our object literal called movie. We're going to get the name, the rating, the genre, the year, and the price from the input fields and assign them to those properties. Now look at the build HTML method. Inside of here, I'm going to get the HTML from that template element. So I say get element template dot inner HTML. Again, that get element comes from our common JS, and it simply does a return document.getElement by ID. So then, of course, that lets me then read the inner HTML. So what I get back in the HTML variable is all of the labels right here. All of that gets put into this HTML variable. Now it's a simple matter for me writing my own kind of little template engine here on lines 80 through 84 to simply go through and do a replace on each of those tags. I replace the name tag with this.name, the rating tag with this.rating, etc. And then finally I return that HTML from this method. Then on line 91, get element output, so that's that div, and put into the inner HTML the movie.buildHTML, whatever comes back from that. So when we run this, we're going to exactly what we saw before, but again, we've done it a slightly different way. This actually is a little bit more efficient. Plus, we get a lot easier to read. We get the color coding. So by doing this, using the template, you're going to see that this will help your coding quite a bit. Let's do another example of using a template. And this one will be to add a row to a table. In this HTML file, I've got my same inputs again. I've got the movie name, the movie rating, the genre, the year released, the rental price. And then I've got the button that says display data. Now, instead of a div ID equals output, look, I've got a table called movie table. I've got a T head with the TR and the THs. So and then I have a T body that's on line 57. So that's where I want to insert a row with the data that's put into each of those input fields. So again, I'm going to create a template, ID equals template, type equals text/HTML, and then the HTML that I want inside of there is our TR with our TDs, and each TD then is going to have a little token or a tag to replace. In the display data, I build my movie object literal again, and I grab each of the values from the inputs, put them into the appropriate properties. I grab the same inner HTML from that template element and put it into the HTML, and I do my search and replaces. And then down here, this is the part that's changed. Now what I want to do is get the table element. So I'm referencing that movie table. I then want to go grab the elements by tag name tBody. So I do that by get elements by tag name tBody and then subscript 0, gives me the first one. And then I'm going to use that body to insert a row using body.rows.length, which will be 0 right now. So I'm going to insert it at number 0. So that creates a new row for me. And then new row.innerHTML is going to be the result of calling movie.buildHTML. So if I run this, takes each of those values and puts them into that table. Let's now take a look at looping over an array to build a table using those same methods that we just looked at. In this HTML, as you can see, I've just simply got a table, ID equals movie table. I've got the same T head that we saw before, and I've got the T body. I have my same template that we saw before. And then down here, I'm going to create an array of movie data. So I've got an array of object literals. Each one is a movie. So I've got a few different movies here with name, rating, genre, year, and price. So now in the window.onLoad, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a reference to that table element. I'm going to get a reference to the body, and then I'm going to grab the template HTML. Then I'm going to use the movies array, and I'm going to do a for each over that. And I'm going to pass in the row for each of those movies, and I'll now assign to the HTML variable the template. So each time through, it's going to get that template over and over again. And then I'm going to just simply do a search and replace again on all of those values in each element of the row that I'm currently on. I'll insert that into the table. There we go. Let's go ahead and run this. And when we see it come up, we should have those 3 rows of data from that movie array that I created. In this lesson, you gain the ability to dynamically incorporate HTML through template literals. You understood the advantage of template literals over traditional string concatenation. You observed various instances of template literal usage, and you acquired knowledge on how to utilize the template element. Coming up next, using handlebars.js for HTML templating.